if the Mets really want to be quote unquote aggressive here, they need to go out there, blow Kyle Tucker out of the water, say like, hey, Kyle Tucker, we're going to give you a 3-year, $150 million contract. Yeah, it's a lot of money. Kyle Tucker's numbers don't indicate that this is a $50 million a year player. I think that something crazy like that is what it's going to take to get him to agree to the short-term contract and blow the LA Dodgers out of the water. If you come within a few $1,000,000 of what the Dodgers are offering, it's not competitive enough. Welcome back to the Meet the Mets Fans podcast. I'm your host, Stefan, live from the Meet the Mets Fans studio. I'm here today doing a bit of a solo show. We're going to take you guys through some of the major things that are happening around MLB that have an impact on the New York Mets. There's some talk about the Mets and Kyle Tucker. We'll dive into what's real, what's not. Is it possible that Kyle Tucker will actually be a New York Met? We're going to talk more about it in a little bit. And then we'll dive into some of the headlines that are surrounding this team, some of the moves that the Mets have made that don't have a huge impact, but things that we should be paying attention to as they do impact the overall payroll of our team. So let's just jump right in, guys. 2 big deals have happened this week in the MLB. And spoiler alert, none of them involve the Mets. In fact, both of them involve the Chicago Cubs. The Chicago Cubs made a deal with Alex Bregman, signed one of the big bat free agents that are out there. 5 years, $175 million deal. And it's no surprise to me that Bregman was never really somebody that the Mets were looking to get. Bregman is not somebody that the Mets saw as a fit. I'm not really sure why they wouldn't see him as a fit given the moves that they've made. So it's very, very clear to me that the Mets could bring Alex Bregman in as a bat on this team and then do something else with Brett Baty, whether that be trade Brett Baty to another team to bring in some pitching, to bring in a bat in the outfield, or keep Brett Baty, teach him first base, teach him left field, give him other opportunities to get at bats. But Alex Bregman is absolutely a bat that fits what David Stearns is looking to do. I guess David Stearns looked at it and said, my infield is clogged. I believe in the guys that I have on this team. And ultimately, the Mets were never really linked to Bregman at all. 5 years, $175 million, making the Cubs a lot better, building themselves towards being in competition with the Dodgers, while the Mets are standing pat, and we'll see what they end up doing. The other deal that the Cubs made earlier in the week, the Cubs traded for Edward Cabrera from the Miami Marlins. They gave up their number 1 prospect in Owen, I believe his name is Cassisi, could be wrong on how you say that. Their number 11 prospect, Christian Hernandez, and a third baseman by the name of Edgardo De Leon. I don't know how the Cubs fans feel about making that trade, whether or not those prospects are somebody they thought Edward Cabrera was worth bringing in. I think they gave up a lot, to be 100% honest with you. Their number 1 prospect, their number 11 prospect, and another third baseman. I absolutely saw that deal and thought to myself, like every Met fan, oh, damn, it was Edward Cabrera type of guy that could make this Mets rotation better. And what would it have taken for the Mets to give the Marlins to make that deal happen? And ultimately, I don't know that Edward Cabrera is the type of pitcher that actually makes the Mets better. The Mets have a lot of guys on this roster that could be like Edward Cabrera, a lot of guys with high potential that have had things happen in the past that have prevented them from seeing their full potential. For Edward Cabrera, it's been injuries. He hasn't been able to stay on the field. I don't know that he's worth an organization's number 1 prospect. There was a report out there that said the Mets were linked and that even gave what the Mets had as a potential deal on the table for Edward Cabrera, which was Brett Baty and AJ Ewing. Obviously, it's not the Mets giving up their number 1 prospect, their number 2 prospect, but it is the Mets giving up a major league third baseman in Brett Baty, a guy that the Mets value. They believe in his bat. They believe in his defense. And to give a major league player away, plus AJ Ewing, who the Mets firmly believe in as one of their top prospects, a guy that is going to be cracking top 100, if not higher than that, prospect boards all over MLB this year. AJ Ewing is a guy that the Mets firmly believe in. That's what they had on the table as a potential way to get Edward Cabrera to be a New York Met. And ultimately, based on the rumors that we're hearing, of course, the Mets decided to back out of that deal, decided that they don't need Edward Cabrera and they don't view him as an upgrade to what they currently have, at least not one that's worth Brett Baty and AJ Ewing. And I actually agree with David Stearns on this one. I don't think that Brett Baty and AJ Ewing are worth giving up in a package that brings me back a guy that doesn't necessarily make my team 100% better. I'm looking at him and saying there's a bunch of other guys that can do that for me that I already have, and it's not going to cost me anything to roll with the guys I have. And I think that that's going to be the theme for the Mets and when it comes to the starting rotation is they have guys that if everything clicks, those guys are going to be really good, and our starting rotation is going to be really good. We're going to roll with the young kids. We're going to hope that Sean Manaea can bounce back. We're going to hope that Kodai Senga is the ace-like pitcher that we thought he was going to be, that he pitched like before he got injured last year. And we're going to hope that David Peterson can put together a full season and not break down by the end. And if all of those things can happen, if Clay Holmes can repeat what he did last year at minimum, if not improve on those things, our starting rotation is pretty good. So if you're going to do something to add to this rotation, you have to be looking at the piece that you're getting back and saying, that guy makes my team better than all the other guys that are on this team. And it's very clear to see how that's going to happen. And I don't think David Stearns is making those moves. So the Mets ultimately in this one, Edward Cabrera to the Cubs, decided not to make a move here to get him. Cubs can make their team better. The Mets, I think, here actually made their team better by not making this move. So those are the two big moves. They do have an impact on our team because now those are guys that are no longer available for us to go out there and get. But it seems as though the big talk around the Mets right now and what's coming out there is that the Mets have been in conversation with Kyle Tucker, and they have had, whether it's a Zoom call or an in-person meeting. I've seen something that they met with Kyle Tucker in Florida. I've seen something about them meeting with Kyle Tucker on Zoom. There's 3 teams that are rumored to have met with Kyle Tucker, and we'll kind of throw this up there right now. So this is the first place that this came out was from Jim Duquette on SNY, talking about the Mets having this meeting with Kyle Tucker. They have the strong interest. They're going to go out there and be aggressive. They're one of the top 3 most aggressive teams to get Kyle Tucker, along with, of course, the LA Dodgers, who are aggressive for everybody on this planet that they're trying to bring onto their team, and the Blue Jays, the 2 teams that were in the World Series last year, trying to compete against each other to continue to be better and try to repeat themselves and go back to the World Series. So the Mets being in that conversation, listed as one of the 3 teams that are aggressively pursuing Kyle Tucker. As a Met fan, is it exciting? I don't know. I think there's a lot of Met fans that are out there that are like, yes, this is great. This is exciting. We're going to do something. We see that there's a major league player out there who could actually make our team better. Kyle Tucker is a stud. You bring him onto this team and you add him to the roster. You can see how this offense can be an offense that's really, really solid. But I think there are other Met fans out there that are living in the world of Mets misery and saying to themselves, this is just a tease. Kyle Tucker is not coming to the New York Mets. These rumors and news that are out there are just getting our hopes up and getting us excited and hyped up for something that's actually never going to happen. And so where do I stand in that camp? You know, I think it's hard to say I want Kyle Tucker. I think anybody who's looking at the Mets roster currently and saying, I don't want Kyle Tucker, I want to leave the roster exactly the way it is, or I want to go make a trade. I hear the idea of a trade. The idea that we can leave this roster, you're trying to sell yourself a bag of goods here. You're trying to sell yourself on the team is what it is. But if you can actually go get Kyle Tucker, you need to do everything that you can to possibly get him because he absolutely makes your team better. Do I think the Mets are going to be able to beat out these other 2 teams and get him? Do I actually even think the Mets are, quote unquote, aggressively pursuing Kyle Tucker? I think the Mets are calling up Kyle Tucker and saying, hey, Kyle, it looks like you're not going to get a 12-year deal from anybody. You're super young. You're super talented. Come accept a high AAV contract with us in New York. Show everybody what you can do in New York City. Rebuild the value that you might have lost from having a down year last year by coming to the New York Mets, signing a 3 or 4 year contract that has an opt out after 1 year, after 2 years, after every single year if you need to, and saying, this is an opportunity for you to make a lot of money really quickly. Come here and help make our team better this year, and we'll see where things go. You can either stay with the New York Mets for the next 3 to 4 years and decide to stay here for longer. You can opt out of that contract if you have a great year while you're still super young and jump back into that free agent market next year and be the top dog in the free agent market next year, coming into the offseason, having a much better season in 2026. And so I think if the Mets can convince Kyle Tucker that a short-term, high average annual value contract is what's best for him, then I think that they are going to be in on that. At the end of the day, I think if they are going to come in within several $1 million of the Los Angeles Dodgers on a similar deal, a short-term high AAV deal, I think ultimately Kyle Tucker and most free agents are going to choose the Dodgers. The Dodgers give you the best opportunity to win a championship, and that's what these major league players are looking to do. They're looking to win championships. And so if I'm Kyle Tucker and I'm not going to get what I want, I'm not going to get a 12-year contract or a 10-year contract or even a 7-year contract, then I might be looking at that short-term deal and saying, "All right, who's going to pay me the most money and how am I going to go out there and give myself the best chance to win a championship?" And so I think if the Mets really want to be quote unquote aggressive here, they need to go out there and they need to put their best foot forward. They need to blow Kyle Tucker out of the water when it comes to the financial value that they're going to put out there, and say like, "Hey, Kyle Tucker, we're going to give you a 3-year, $150 million contract." Yeah, it's a lot of money. Kyle Tucker's numbers don't indicate that this is a $50 million a year player. However, you're paying for him to decide to take the short-term deal. And I think that something crazy like that is what it's going to take to both get him to agree to the short-term contract and blow the LA Dodgers out of the water. Like I said, I think if you come within a few $1,000,000 of what the Dodgers are offering, it's not competitive enough. And so we'll see what the Mets end up doing here. We'll see if the Mets are actually aggressively pursuing Kyle Tucker or not in the coming days. What's become clear is that domino of Kyle Tucker needs to fall in order for the free agent market to continue to roll for a guy like Bellinger, right? If you are Bellinger and if you are Scott Boras, you are waiting for Kyle Tucker to sign his deal because Cody Bellinger has no market. From everything that we've heard, Cody Bellinger's received a couple of offers from the Yankees, and the Yankees are bidding against themselves. If you are Cody Bellinger, you need the other teams that miss out on Kyle Tucker to say, "Damn, we missed out on Kyle Tucker. Who's the next best available player? It's Cody Bellinger. Let's go try to sign Cody Bellinger and get into the sweepstakes against the Yankees." Now, at the end of the day, who do I think the Mets have a better chance of beating out to get one of these players? I think the Mets have a better chance of beating out the Yankees than they do against beating out the Dodgers. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in where the Dodgers are the evil empire. They get pretty much what they want because they can pay anybody whatever they want, but they also have the value of being a World Series contending team year after year, which I hope our team is one day. But right now, we're not. We have been able to beat out the Yankees in the past to get a free agent that we want, Juan Soto. And I think that that's somebody that we can beat out again. So if the Mets do miss on Kyle Tucker, he ends up going to the Dodgers or the Blue Jays or wherever else. The Cody Bellinger sweepstakes will start up. And if the Mets are the ones that missed out on Tucker, they're going to be back into that market trying to get Bellinger. If they're actively pursuing Tucker, why wouldn't they be actively pursuing Bellinger once the Tucker domino drops? And for Bellinger and for Scott Boras, that's how you reinvigorate his market. You get these other teams that miss out on Tucker to buy back in and say, "What do we have to do? What do we have to do to make our team better?" Cody Bellinger does make our team better. He's just not the caliber of player that Kyle Tucker is. And so he's the next best free agent that you can go out there and get. And that's what I assume is going to happen here. I assume that Kyle Tucker is going to fall first. I assume that Cody Bellinger is going to wait for that to happen, and then he'll fall shortly after that. But we are several weeks away from spring training happening, right? It's about a month for pitchers and catchers to report. The market, we hope, is going to pick up soon and that you're going to start seeing some of these guys come off the board. So we'll see where the Mets end up going with both Kyle Tucker, with Cody Bellinger. At the end of the day, I've said it before on this podcast and I'll say it again. I do think that the Mets believe in the roster they have now, that roster can be a competitive team. And it seems as though the MLB kind of agrees with that. So we'll talk a little bit more about where the Mets are ranking right now in terms of their ability to be competitive next year based on the roster they have. We'll jump into that in just a little bit. But let's cover some more of the headlines that are surrounding the Mets. Let's really quickly take a look at another move that the Mets didn't make, which is to bring back Ryan Stanek. So Ryan Stanek, who's been with the Mets for the last 2 years, is part of our bullpen, somebody who is a roller coaster ride type of guy, super nice dude, throws really hard, and has gotten himself into hot water a lot for this team. A guy that last year I was absolutely done with and didn't want to see on the mound ever again. Will never be on the mound again for the New York Mets. Ryan Stanek has reportedly signed a deal with the Cardinals. It looks like that deal is a 1-year contract for $3.5 million. Great for you, dude. And then the deal also includes a $6 million club option for 2027. So great job by Ryan Stanek to secure that deal. If he can then have the club pick up that $6 million option, awesome for him. But I think what the Mets are, how this impacts the Mets, the Mets are better because we're not going to have Ryan Stanek on the bump for us anymore. Don't have to worry about this guy blowing the game. So moving on from Ryan Stanek is a move that the Mets clearly did not make. Let's take a look at several moves that the Mets did make in the last several days. The Mets were able to avoid arbitration with all of their arbitration eligible players. So we'll take a look at all of these guys and the money that they ultimately were able to agree to these guys with. They did not have to see an arbitrator and debate with their players on what their value is. That's always a weird situation to get into when a player on your team says, "Hey, I think I'm worth $10 million." The Mets are like, no, we think you're worth $4 million, and then you've got to go against each other in this arbitration hearing where you tell this player, hey, you're not as good as you think you are, and here are all the reasons why. So accept this deal to come back and play for me. Really weird situation that you don't want to get into as a team with players that you're trying to keep happy. And so ultimately the Mets had 6 players that were up for arbitration: David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Alvy, Luis Torrens, Reed Garrett, and Huascar Brazuban are all the guys that the Mets were able to come to an agreement with on a value for the 2026 season. And ultimately, I think the values for a lot of these guys make a ton of sense. David Peterson for $8 million makes a ton of sense for the New York Mets. Glad they were able to agree to that contract with him. If David Peterson didn't have the last month of a season that he did have, he probably would have a higher value that he'd be bringing in here because he would have had a pretty fantastic season. David Peterson ultimately did have that terrible end of the year for the Mets. I think he ultimately just ran out of steam, could not complete the season and be the guy that we relied on throughout the vast majority of the season. So gets an $8 million contract for 2026 in arbitration. Pretty solid move by the Mets because if David Peterson can bounce back and give us that full season, he's at least a number 3 starter in your rotation. For most of last year, he was our best pitcher and the only guy that we had on this roster that can go that could go 7 innings. So I'm happy with the $8 million for David Peterson. It's a nice solid contract, and it's a type of contract that is movable. All right, so David Peterson on an $8 million contract. If the Mets decide they do want to make a trade to improve their starting pitching, to improve the outfield, to improve first base, David Peterson on an $8 million contract is, I think, a contract that would be appealing to a lot of different teams. And now that the arbitration is over and that contract is agreed on, other teams know exactly what they're paying for the guy. So nice move here by the Mets with David Peterson. Let's talk about Tyler McGill, Reed Garrett. These are 2 guys that the Mets were able to avoid arbitration on. $0.5 million for Tyler McGill, $1.3 million for Reed Garrett. And that money is for those guys to rehab this year, right? So they're going to keep these guys in the system. Obviously, they're not like cutting them from the roster. These are guys that are still under contract, and so arbitration money that they agreed to, not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. These guys will not pitch for the team in 2026. They will be rehabbing from their respective surgeries that they had this year. And then we jump into Alvy and Luis Torrens making very similar money. These are our 2 catchers on our team. Alvy, a guy with huge potential. I think a lot of Met fans, especially young Met fans, think he's super fiery, super powerful. We want to see him develop into the catcher that we thought he could be and become that big power bat. But we've got Luis Torrens right behind him as a guy that could step in and be a starter if we need him to be, guy with a lot of clutch in his bat, and somebody that I think the Mets value a lot in terms of this catching team. They're able to bring both of those guys back for less than $5 million in total for their catchers, which I think is a solid deal by the Mets. And then we have Huascar Brazuban, who has been really, really solid since the Mets got him from the Marlins. Essentially $1 million 0.05 is what he's going to be making for the 2026 season. Solid piece to the bullpen here. And I think Brazuban locking up one of those spots makes a lot of sense. I think he earned that at the end of last year. And so he'll be likely filling one of those spots in the bullpen, but it's the type of money that if he sucks and he's not doing a great job, the Mets will just cut him and move on and cut their losses, which we've definitely seen them do a bunch. Next headline that I want to jump into and tackle here for the Mets. This is what I was talking about a little while ago. So MLB put out on January 9th, which was just several days ago, their top 10 power rankings of teams. Justin actually sent this one over to me. He was shocked when he saw it. I sat there and I looked at it and I'm shocked now that I'm seeing it. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? What are we missing as Met fans? The Mets are ranked 8th in this top 10 power rankings. And if it were up to me, the Mets wouldn't even be on this chart based on the team that we have currently. But MLB views the roster that the Mets currently have as a top 8 team in the MLB. That's essentially saying that this team is going to be a playoff team as is. And, I've been saying it here on the pod, the Mets believe in this team. And it seems like MLB believes in this team also. They rank them just below the Yankees. The Yankees are number 7. The Dodgers and the Blue Jays, the 2 teams in the World Series last year, are ranked number 1 and 2. The Mariners, who had a fantastic year last year, ranked 3. Phillies ranked 4. Boston's ranked 5. The Brewers are ranked 6. Yankees 7. Mets 8. Baltimore Orioles are ranked 9. And the Chicago Cubs are ranked 10. I think the Chicago Cubs are probably bumping themselves up after the 2 deals that they just made, probably a little higher on this list if MLB were to redo it today. And they will continue to put out these power rankings. But based on where the Mets are, I got to let you guys know that I'm absolutely shocked that MLB views the Mets in this light. Maybe MLB is looking at this Mets roster and saying, we know that David Stearns and Steve Cohen are going to go out of bat. We know that they're going to improve this roster. That's a heck of a prediction that they're making. If they're using that to rank the Mets 8, I'm sure, maybe that's the case, but I highly doubt it. They're actually looking at the Mets roster and saying, this is a solid roster. And maybe we as Met fans need to come around to that. Maybe we as Met fans need to start looking at this roster and start to believe in the guys that David Stearns has put onto this team as actually being a competitive roster. And we'll see when the season starts, right? Like we've been talking on this pod a ton about the Mets continuing to improve. Whether or not that's going to happen remains to be seen. But if things stand pat with everyone in the MLB, the Mets are a top 8 team in the league, according to MLB.com. The next topic I want to touch on is this tweet that was put out there by Anthony Ryber several days ago that the Mets will not be having a fan fest and that they decided prior to the end of the season that they would not be having this event. They never intended for Amazing Day, which is what we call our fan fest, to be an annual event. And ultimately, as a Met fan, I think this is a huge disappointment. I think that it's the Mets sending a message to the fans that there is not much to celebrate right now. We've lost a lot of the fan favorites, and there will be a lot of negativity at an event like this, especially because the Mets have not done a whole lot since. If the Mets signed Kyle Tucker and then they announced they were having an amazing day, I think a lot of people would be coming out to that amazing day super excited about the team that we're going to put out on the field. But based on the team that we have now, based on the guys that we've lost, it's very difficult for the Mets to put this event together and have it be a success. So ultimately, it's probably a good decision on their part to not have Amazing Day this year, but it is a disappointment as a fan because I do think this event created a lot of buzz and hype for the team. It gave fans an opportunity to give their voice, which is what we're all about here on this podcast. And ultimately, selfishly, for this podcast, huge disappointment. I definitely, since we started this podcast, was super excited to go out to Amazing Day this year, to get our brand out there, to wear one of these quarter zips that I'm wearing right now that my wife got me. Meet the Mets fans with our giant logo on the back, super cool swag to go out there and promote our podcast, talk to Mets fans, get their reactions, and get them here on the pod. And I just think an event like Amazing Day would have been a super cool place to go and do that. There was a Queens baseball convention that happened a couple of weeks ago. And I think if fans knew for sure that Amazing Day was not going to happen this year, a lot more fans would have gone to that event than they probably did in the this year. And so, yeah, it sucks a little bit that the Mets are not going to be doing this, but ultimately probably in their best interest to not have to go out there and have David Stearns face the fans. Right, because the last time we had an Amazing Day, fans went out there and told them that's how they felt about Pete Alonso, and ultimately the Pete Alonso deal got done. I don't think David Stearns wants to go out there right now and face Met fans, given that he has not done much to improve this roster. If the Mets went out there, like I said, and signed Kyle Tucker, and then announced that they're having an Amazing Day, it would be a huge event, and a lot of fans would be very interested in attending. So ultimately, they made a decision they're not going to do this. Like I said, probably in their best interest. Sucks for us as fans. And that's going to bring us to the close of our headline segment. The next thing I actually wanted to tackle on the pod, which has been super cool for us to as we continue to grow the Meet the Mets Fans podcast, is the interaction from fans like you guys commenting on our stuff on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. Like the following is continuing to grow day by day, which is super cool to see. Fans are starting to interact with us on these platforms, and we are doing our best to respond to each of you guys, keep those conversations going. And so one of the things that we wanted to do on this episode is to read some of the comments from our episode 17. This first comment is from G Money Stacks 555. Hey, Stefan, Justin, and Sid from the Meet the Mets Fans podcast. I recently started checking out the show. I wanted to run something by you, and we appreciate that, G Money Stacks. What G Money says here is, we still don't have a left fielder, and there are some prospects that haven't been talked about as much in the Mets media. He took the liberty of looking into Chris Suero, who's a catcher that plays third base, left field, Jacob Reimer, who plays left field, third base, first base, super young kid, 21 years old right now, going to be 22. And what G Money Stacks is asking is, how do we feel about those? Because there's no guarantee that Kyle Tucker and Cody Bellinger will be coming here to play for us. G Money Stacks goes on to say that there are two players left on this core in Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor, and the Mets have to go about surrounding those guys. So, when it comes to these young players, G Money, I do believe that the Mets believe firmly in those young players. And I think it's why we haven't seen a trade happen. The Mets came close in this Brett Beatty deal, but AJ Ewing was, I think, was the big holdup here, because the Mets really value their young players. And if they're going to move them, it's going to be for a guy that significantly makes this team better. So I appreciate you taking the liberty to look into these guys that could potentially fill out roles for us in the outfield, because it seems like that's where we have holes. Our system has a lot of young infield prospects. What it doesn't have is a ton of outfield prospects, but I do think that they're a few years away from being able to make an impact at the major league level. And I agree with you that this core of Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto need to be surrounded by guys that can help make this team good now, right? Like, we were promised as Met fans that we would have a competitive team out there year after year. And in order to be able to do that, the Mets absolutely need to bring guys into this roster to make the 2026 team a little bit stronger, in my opinion. This next comment comes from T Lion 83. Do you guys believe the issue with the Mets is the clubhouse? They missed on players where the issue wasn't money. Do you think the issue is that players believe the clubhouse is a problem? That's a tough one. I think that free agents are hearing things about the Mets clubhouse and saying, I don't want to play for a team that has a clubhouse like that? No. The reason I don't think that is because that team that you heard all those things about doesn't exist. Those players aren't here anymore, right? Like, even if those players, and nobody here is saying that Pete Alonso was a problem, that Brendan Nimmo was a problem. Maybe they were. The very likelihood is that those guys are really good guys and they just didn't gel together last year. I think a big part of them not gelling together last year was they lost, right? They were not winning games. They were not making comebacks in games. There were no magical moments that we can really point to and say, wow, that really bonded this team together. And so I think that the clubhouse was not as tight as it was, obviously, in 2024 in the 2025 season. It led to all of this chatter that's out there about the clubhouse. But I think for players to look at what happened on the 2025 locker room and say, I don't want to play there, I don't think that's happening, because they get to come in and be the 2026 locker room. So I don't think that the reason the Mets are missing out on free agents is because those free agents don't want to be a part of this clubhouse. I do think, and I've brought this up before, players might look at how a guy like Pete Alonso, a guy like Edwin Diaz was treated by Mets ownership, a team that goes out there and says that we care about our team, we're a family here, we're a family first organization. And then all the players really feel that way. And then you turn you look at a guy like Pete Alonso, who a lot of us believe should be a lifelong Met, and you kind of turn your back on the guy and say, we don't believe in you. I think that free agents potentially could be saying, like, how much of a fan-friendly organization are you guys really? And I think that could be a potential reason for why free agents have doubt in their mind about whether or not they want to join this team. At the end of the day, though, I do think it's all about money. Right? At the end of the day, these guys are looking at the dollars and cents, and they're saying, how can we give ourselves the best possibility to win a championship and make a ton of money? And clubhouse issues aside, the way that your family is treated aside, I think when you're making as much money as Juan Soto is making, those are perks that can get you to sign with a team. But I think that those are exactly that. They're perks. They're not the reason you're deciding not to sign with the New York Mets. Those are things that as you're signing with the Mets or whatever organization, you're like, all right, what else can I tack on here? And so, I think ultimately the Mets are missing out on free agents right now because they're not being aggressive enough to get those guys. David Stearns has a philosophy that he doesn't want to sign these guys to long-term deals. And as a player, these guys are looking for long-term security. They're looking for security for their families. It's not just about the idea that, like, I'm going to make a ton of money over 3 years. These guys have families. They're looking at where their kids are going to go to school and trying not to interrupt their education by moving them across the country as much as possible. If you look at the Alex Bregman deal that he just signed, one of the things that Alex Bregman talked about was looking for that 5-year security with a no trade clause, so that he doesn't have to uproot his family's lives and move them again. I think that matters to a lot of teams. And David Stearns, as a general philosophy that we're seeing at least for this 2026 season, is ultimately looking at not signing guys beyond 3 years. And I think that that's a deterrent for potential free agents. So I think those are the big reasons here. T Lion 83 why the Mets have not signed some of these free agents that are out there right now. So, like I said about the comments, we truly do appreciate those coming in. We truly do appreciate the interaction of Met fans. That's going to bring us to the end of this podcast, guys. We hope that you continue to like, follow, and subscribe to the Meet the Mets Fans podcast. Share it with fellow Met fans so they can check out what we're doing here, trying to build this community of Met fans. And we mean it when we say it. We want Met fans to come on this podcast with us and co-host an episode. Join us on here and tell us your origin story. So if you're interested in doing that, send us an email to our email address, which is meetthemetsfans25@gmail.com, or send us a comment, DM us on social media. We're happy to bring Met fans onto the podcast with us and give you that experience of hosting a pod so you can see if it's something that you're interested in, you want to continue to do, or just to have that experience. So that's going to be it for us, guys. Continue to check out the podcast. The second that news drops, you guys will hear it. We'll be on the pod giving you guys an update. Let's have a great day, Met fans. Let's go, Mets.
Meet the Mets fans, voices rising up from the stands. Hear their cheers, hear their groans, feel their highs, feel their moans. Stories untold now on the mic. Mets fans, you